we now move back to the UK, where we are, in effect, hotting up the case for, I would say, potential war with Iran. News today put out by Defence Science and Technology Laboratories that they've had a critical advancement in the UK's defence capabilities. What you're actually looking at is a fake picture of a fake hypersonic missile that doesn't yet exist, but nonetheless, they're talking about it as though it does. They say that this might be ready by 2030, part of a joint UK-US project, and this gives them opportunity to hark back to what was happening last year, being put out by Defence Intelligence, where the suggestion was that there was an inextricable link between what was going on in Russia-Ukraine and indeed Iran's support of it. So this is a shaping operation, certainly in people's minds, to sow the idea that state threat from Russia is absolutely synonymous with state threat from Iran, and therefore that something has to be done about it. And we see that the British Forces broadcasting service here via its Forces News is, again, pumping up exactly the same story about this hypersonic, what's being called a successful test. But of course, it's still 5 years away from being a reality. And I think interesting to note that they conclude the article by saying Brazil, China, France, Iran, North Korea and Japan are among other countries with plans or programs devoted to hypersonic weapons. Of course, what they completely fail to mention is that since 2018, via its Kinjal system, Russia has had a hypersonic capability. And this is one of the things that is not to be talked about, because it clearly highlights the fact that the UK is not only well behind Russia, but supposedly it destroys the narrative that Russia is actually presenting a state threat, because if it really were, as I've asked before, why on earth would it not be doing rather more than it is as we sit there and supposedly build up our various arsenals? So a question to be asked there, but obviously the authorities not to be deterred insofar as the building of a narrative and indeed the intelligence that's supposed to support that goes. And we look at the country policy and information note on the government's website on Iran. Now, this says November 2022, but this is actually the most recent document. And rather remarkably, it refers back to statistics on military capabilities that are, first of all, not put together by this country. They're American statistics, and they go back to 2019. And that is the information upon which we are supposed to be deciding what relationship Iran has with the United Kingdom in terms of a state threat. Now, I've shown this slide before, but this is Hamish Falconer, Minister for the Middle East and North Africa, and he has stated that it is regrettably true that Iran's nuclear program has never been more advanced, and it threatens international peace and security. And this has been bandied around absolutely up and down the place. There's been debates on this in both the House of Commons and the House of Lords, but there is not one shred of evidence with which they can substantiate this. So I think it bears a lot more scrutiny. But we'll just go to look at the former ambassador for Iran, 2002-2006, Richard Dalton, who spoke on Newsnight recently, and this is what he had to say.
How seriously do you take this from President Trump?
I do take it seriously. The risk of a war between Israel and the United States on the one hand and Iran on the other has never been higher. And that's because it's been Israel's aim for many years to strike Iran, and they've always wanted to attract the United States to their side to do it because of limitations in Israel's capabilities, particularly in sustaining a long war. This is chiefly about weakening Iran as a state. Iran, and of course President Trump and Mr. Netanyahu knows this, does not have a nuclear weapon and does not have a military nuclear program. And that has been the consensus of US intelligence agencies in the US national intelligence estimates for the last 22 years. So let us hope that on this occasion, the Americans adopt a more reasonable position than has been sketched out for Iran hitherto.
Some hope, I think we might say. But nonetheless, he is quite right to point out that there is no intelligence to support this position. And yet politicians bandy it around absolutely willy-nilly, never with any comeback on this. And it is therefore pertinent and coincident that a carrier strike group is about to depart Portsmouth towards the end of this month to go towards the Mediterranean and then on to the Indo-Pacific. And we'll just listen to what Luke Pollard, Armed Forces Minister, has to say about this and why it's happening.
From the bridge of our flagship, HMS Prince of Wales, I'm proud to announce that our carrier strike group, made up of key naval, air and land forces from Britain and our allies, will depart from Portsmouth at the end of the month on its 2025 global deployment. Codenamed Operation HIGHMAST, it will engage with more than 30 countries, stretching from Italy to Japan and from South Korea to Australia. This isn't just any mission. With nearly 4,000 British personnel, accompanied throughout by a Norwegian frigate and auxiliary ship, we're leading a multinational task force of 13 nations in a demonstration of integrated deterrence across the globe. For periods, the carrier strike group will come under NATO command, strengthening the bedrock alliance of our national security. Naval power remains vital to upholding the international rules-based system that underpins our security and prosperity. Through Operation HIGHMAST, we stand firm with our allies against those who challenge the international order, reminding the world that threats in one region affect every region, that the security of the Euro-Atlantic and Indo-Pacific are fundamentally indivisible.
Fundamentally indivisible, I think, are the words to concentrate on there, because soon it appears that the state threat from Iran will be fundamentally indivisible from that posed by Russia, and that seems to be the messaging that's going on here. There's a couple of other points to draw out of that. It's being referred to as Operation HIGHMAST and not exercise. Therefore, there is a suggestion there inherent that there is a specific potential for kinetic action. And of course, interestingly, they're defying the naming convention there. An operational name should never have anything to do with the operation itself, but naming it HIGHMAST would seem to be in breach of that. Also, of course, initially it's going to be under the command of the NATO exercise, which means that should the carrier strike group be engaged at that point, that would of course trigger Article 5 and a response from all NATO members. So I think that's something that absolutely people should be bearing in mind. It's also said to have a cargo of, or at least capability of, up to 24 F-35 fighters. And if you've listened to Tim Davis, the former fast jet trainer and pilot with the Royal Navy and Royal Air Force, talk about the F-35 capability against Russian air defence, then you would know that having 24 F-35s on board is not much to write home about. But this really, as I say, suggests that there is that linkage between what we're told about Russia and indeed what we're to be told about Iran. So it's a very clear sort of telegraphing of intent, at least what people are supposed to believe.
Well, as you know, Article 5 is not an automatic reflex, especially if you happen to be out of area. So it seems like the British Navy having difficulty fielding more warships than they have admirals at the moment. It's a bit of a casus belli, or bait, as it were. And so that's a little bit worrying when you think about it strategically, militarily. I can't see how they could make a big impact in any conflict versus the adversaries, which they are claiming to be opposing there. But just quickly, on the Iran issue here, I'll bring this up on screen. Charles, if the United States attacks Iran, that's just a little summary there. It's a couple years old, but 2024, I think, U.S. bases and troops deployment in the immediate vicinity of Iran. So all those would be targeted in a matter of minutes. So this is a huge number of target lists. That doesn't include Israel as well as Cyprus, which may or may not be included in that if they believe that that's where the origins. Even Oman and Saudi Arabia are on that list because they've got U.S. bases there, not to say anything about the Fifth Fleet in Bahrain or Kuwait, and Iraq for that matter. So, you know, there will be a blowback or a price to pay for the U.S. And I might add, too, Charles, that what the Trump administration are proposing for Iran, that they basically dismantle, or that the U.S. is allowed to destroy Iran's civilian nuclear program and eliminate all of their missiles. So the demilitarization of Iran, and if they don't comply, the U.S. will launch a preemptive tactical nuclear strike and a decapitation operation, as it were, to take out the leadership. So it's regime change, destroying the country, and so forth. These aren't negotiations, and I want to warn people just a little lesson of history. Shades of 1914, the Austro-Hungarian Empire imposed huge, stringent demands on Serbia at the time, by which Serbia complied with all but one of those, and they still, Austro-Hungarians still declared war on Serbia. So that's what's happening here. The United States has issued a declaration of war. It's only a question of when they're going to attack. These are not negotiations, and this can't be seen as any kind of acceptable statecraft unless you're talking about the rules-based international order where he who has the power and the money makes the rules. And unfortunately, I believe that's where we are right now. So something to think about there. But just note that Benjamin Netanyahu was in Washington this week, and there he is with Donald Trump looking at pictures of Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump. So some people who like to talk about narcissists and power-hungry oligarchs would get a chuckle at a photo like that. But last time Bibi was in Washington, it looked like they were plotting to cancel the ceasefire in Gaza. That's what eventually happened. Now we have a full-blown resumption of that conflict and the carnage there. What exactly were they planning on this trip to Washington? And it could very well be a joint strike on Iran. At that point, all bets are off, Charles.
Absolutely. Yeah. And again, more to talk about in Extra.